July 19th, 2010. It's a sweltering summer day in College Park, Georgia, a buzzing community just south of Atlanta.
In the summertime, we're talking hot. I mean, they don't call it hot Atlanta by accident.
College Park in July is lively, very lively. It's kind of like almost the end of summer, so it's like that last bit of rush of just wanting to do everything and be outside.
At 10:30 a.m., 22-year-old Aisha Davis is trying to stay cool in the summer heat when she receives an unexpected phone call.
Hey, Errol, what's up?
The call is from Errol Moore, who shares a 5-month-old daughter with Aisha's sister, Janelle Aaron.
He called me and he proceeded to ask me had I spoken to my sister, Janelle. And I told him that no, I hadn't spoken to her.
No, is everything okay?
I'm not sure.
He was worried because he hadn't spoken to her all weekend.
He stated that he called her multiple times on the phone and that she never answered the phone.
I mean, every time I try, it goes straight to voicemail.
Let me try to give her a call.
I hung up with him and then I tried to reach her and I couldn't. And that's what began my worry.
Hey, it's Janelle. I can't get to the phone right now. Leave a message.
Hey, Janelle, give me a call when you get this.
Janelle was pretty tight with her extended family. She talked to them often.
Because it's really not like her to go missing without communicating with someone in the family for days.
So once I reached out to our family and friends, we realized that no one was able to get in contact or had spoken to Janelle in over 4 days.
We knew something was wrong.
Despite a challenging upbringing, 20-year-old Janelle Aaron always kept a positive outlook on life.
We grew up in family and foster care and custody of different family members. It was pretty much her and I against the world. But Janelle was very vibrant. She loved to make people laugh. She loved to what we call roast and joke. Her smile, her presence, she let you know she was here.
We met in high school around 10th grade. She was funny, feisty, really nice, kind, loyal, ride or die.
Janelle was also a dreamer with big plans for her future.
She was into fashion, a fashionista, I would say.
She wanted to be a model originally, but as she got older, Janelle decided that she wanted to be a nurse because she loved taking care of people. She had a knack for making people feel comfortable, making people feel safe.
She had this loving, caring heart, and she wanted to give back.
She was seeking a degree in healthcare into nursing to pursue her final career.
It was around that time Janelle met a fellow student, Errol Moore.
Hey, I think I've seen you in class.
Yeah, it's Mr. Gibson's class, right?
Yeah, I'm Errol.
Janelle.
You mind if I sit?
Of course, you can sit down.
He was confident, and Janelle really gravitated towards that.
So, I'm heading out with some friends after classes this afternoon. You wanna come?
Sounds good. Sure.
Errol was fun and friendly, and they had lots in common in terms of their upbringing.
Once they started dating, the relationship moved fast.
The couple immediately became inseparable. If you saw one, you saw the other.
And in July of 2009, they received some unexpected news that would change their lives forever.
Janelle was dating Errol for about a year when she found out that she was pregnant. She was super excited. She always wanted to be a mother.
She had a natural maternal instinct. She loved children.
The way we grew up, not having our mother in our life in the capacity in which we wanted it, we always said that when we had children that, we were going to be amazing moms.
In February of 2010, her baby girl arrived.
She was excited and happy that she was finally born. She was very attentive, very caring and loving.
Janelle was a wonderful mother.
Once she had her daughter, that's all that mattered. There was nothing more important or a bigger accomplishment for her or achievement than bringing her daughter into this world.
Errol also took parenthood in stride.
Errol as a father was very invested. He was present. He definitely showed that he loved her and that he was excited that he had a new baby in the world.
But just 5 months after the birth of her daughter, Janelle's family is worried that something terrible has happened to the young mother.
No one has heard from Janelle in about 4 days, and this isn't like her to just disappear.
Janelle would never leave her 5-month-old daughter behind and just abandon her.
We decided to reach out to the police and put in a missing persons report.
In the summer of 2010, Janelle Aaron was making strides to fulfill her dream of working in healthcare.
She entered Georgia Perimeter College, working to be a nurse.
She and her boyfriend, Errol Moore, had just welcomed a baby girl the same year. They had a bright future ahead of them.
But on July 19th, Janelle has gone missing.
No one has heard from Janelle in about 4 days.
We decided to reach out to the police and put in a missing persons report. When we spoke to detectives, we tried to drive into them how we knew that something had to be wrong. Janelle had never been away from her daughter for any long extended amount of time, not even more than 24 hours, let alone multiple days.
What's so tricky for law enforcement is to try to understand, is this the type of lady who would go missing? Is this the type of lady who was exhausted from, those early months? What do we have here? Do we actually have a missing person?
So we understand Janelle's a new mom, so you don't think she might have just been trying to get away for a little while?
Absolutely not. She loves her daughter.
The family reiterated that Janelle would never leave her 5-month-old daughter behind and just abandon her.
She loved that baby girl.
Well, where's Janelle's daughter now?
She's at the house with her father.
Did Janelle seem stressed or upset about anything in the days leading up to her disappearance?
Yeah, she's been in a funk lately.
Janelle had been struggling with some postpartum depression.
Janelle dealt with what a lot of women deal with financially, being able to support your child as well as be present at the same time, which, of course, is hard to deal with for anyone.
But that's not all the young mother had been struggling with recently.
Janelle had hit a rough patch with Errol.
Janelle and Errol's relationship was very on again, off again.
And right now they're off. And she's actually seeing somebody new.
Oh, and who's that?
The family told police about this new guy, Tim Williams. This is somebody that Janelle had started dating.
They were in a new relationship, and she talked about him all the time. She was excited about this new relationship and where it could go.
Y'all spoken with this Tim fellow to see if maybe Janelle's with him?
No, we don't have his contact information.
Ladies, thank you for coming in.
However, detectives quickly tracked him down.
After a quick background check, police find out that this Tim Williams worked at a shoe store.
He is a student at Georgia State. He has no criminal background.
Detectives reach out to Tim and ask him to come in for an interview regarding Janelle's disappearance.
I got a phone call from a detective. A detective wanted to see me personally to ask me questions about her whereabouts. And I remember just being shook up.
He's been very compliant and amicable, so he goes into the station for an interview.
Tim, thanks for coming in today.
Of course. Anything I can do to help? I remember going to the police station and talking to the detectives and just feeling sick.
Now, we're gonna have to ask you some tough questions, okay, Tim?
I'm understanding they have to do their job, but just them asking me certain questions as if like I would know what her whereabouts was, as if I would ever injure anybody but her in particular. How much did I love her? Did I provoke anybody in her circle? Or do I have anybody that's after me that would harm her just to get back at me?
This is all so crazy. I have no idea where she is.
I remember just kind of taking it all in and hitting her with a lot of no sir, yes sir, no sir, yes sir. This is all kind of too much.
I just hope that she's okay. She really means a lot to me.
We just had a spark for each other, like a spark. Like, I was really intrigued at how driven she was. Janelle's personality was everything all in once. Like, she was so outgoing and bubbly, but she was also a firecracker. And when she loved you, she loved you.
She's just the best mom.
At that time, I didn't have any kids, but I looked at her daughters as mine. Like, it wasn't no turning her away from me.
Janelle indicated that she was looking for something new, something fresh to get away from her past. It made Tim believe that whatever she had with Errol is past tense, and that he was going to be the man for her moving forward.
Well, when's the last time you've seen Janelle?
Tim says that the last time he talked to Janelle was the morning of July 15th because she had spent the night with him.
What's she cooking?
The last time I spoke and saw Janelle, I have this day in my head. It runs back and back and back. And I just remember her making grits, eggs, and biscuits for me.
I have it right here for you, honey.
Oh, son. This looks delicious. Thank you, baby.
You're welcome.
Timothy explains that Janelle and her daughter had been planning to move in with him.
Part of the day's plan was for her to gather up her things and come move into the apartment with me. It was to the point where it was like, there's no point in us being apart. We might as well just like continue to grow and make this a family. And like, this is gonna be your new life.
Well, I gotta get over there.
I remember she gave me a hug, I kissed her.
I love you so much.
She left and she told me she would give me a call later on that day to let me know she was on her way back.
However, Tim says he never got that call.
Waited for hours and I heard nothing back.
I got honestly concerned, so I called the phone. She didn't pick up.
Later on that evening, Tim finally got a response, but it only raised more cause for concern.
I got a text message back that said, "Who is this?" So I knew that was a concerning point. I was like, I need to go over to this crib that she said she was going to. It was a place that she was sharing with her old ex-boyfriend. I need to go see, make sure everything is okay.
But when Tim went over to the apartment, he didn't find Janelle, her daughter, or Errol.
No one was home as far as I could tell.
Went out there with some childhood friends of mine, and we knocked on the door. We banged on the door because I just had to know she was okay. Nobody ever answered. Tried to peek through the window, didn't see anything.
Well, how does Errol feel about Janelle moving in with you?
Not good. Jealous?
There definitely seemed to be some jealousy issues there. I think Errol viewed the situation as if Tim was trying to take over his family.
But Tim claims Janelle had good reason to leave.
Tim told detectives that he heard Errol had been violent with Janelle in the past.
She didn't tell me a lot of details, but that's part of the reason that she didn't want to be with him anymore.
This information raises red flags for detectives.
If Errol had been violent with Janelle in the past, was it possible that he took things too far?
But before detectives can reach out to Errol, they receive an alarming phone call that will turn the case on its head.
Police get this call from the apartment manager where Janelle lived.
The property manager said, I think y'all want to be aware of this.
They found blood.
In July of 2010, detectives have spoken with Timothy Williams about the disappearance of his girlfriend, 20-year-old Janelle Aaron.
In speaking with Timothy, detectives learned that Janelle was planning to move out of her apartment with her ex, Errol Moore, and start a new life with him.
But that new life never came to fruition.
Timothy claims that after Janelle left his apartment the morning of the 14th to gather her things, he never heard from her again.
And now, Detectives have received an alarming phone call from Janelle's apartment complex.
Police get this call from the apartment manager. They had been preparing to lease out her apartment. They had cleaned it out and everything.
And the property manager said, I think y'all want to be aware of this.
They found blood underneath the carpet in the apartment.
Thank you for your time, Tim.
Is everything okay?
We'll be in touch. Walk you out.
The discovery was made during a routine carpet cleaning.
As the carpet cleaner is, of course, cleaning the carpet, the machinery he uses is applying steam to that area. And as that steam hits, blood starts to come up.
Detectives head to the apartment to view the shocking new blood evidence for themselves.
The padding that was underneath the original carpet was soaked completely in blood, and the wooden subfloor directly underneath that was also soaked completely in blood.
Whoever was at that spot where that stain was starting was bleeding a lot.
And that became the very first sign, beyond our hunch, that we had wrongdoing here, that there was some foul play.
Now more than ever, detectives are eager to speak with Errol Moore. And later that afternoon, they're able to do just that.
He's very cooperative and agrees to go to the station for an interview. He seems very concerned about the blood found at the apartment.
But Errol insists he has no idea how it got there.
Do y'all think that means she's hurt? I'm so worried about her.
We don't know. We've sent the blood off for testing to see if it's a match for Janelle, but it's not looking good.
Detectives tell him that they know he's been physically violent with Janelle in the past. And Errol doesn't deny it. He says, yes, he has, but they always found a way to smooth things out and make up.
It's definitely not something that I'm proud of. I care about her a lot.
Errol says the last time he saw Janelle was on the 15th, when she was packing up her bags at her apartment.
And then later on, he had no idea where Janelle was at and was unable to get in contact with her. He stated that he called her multiple times on the phone and that she never answered the phone.
Errol admits he wasn't happy about Janelle's plan to move in with her new boyfriend, Tim.
He knew about Tim, he knew that Tim was dating Janelle, but he assures detectives that it was nothing serious.
Listen, Janelle and I have never had the perfect relationship, but we always end up working things out.
He said Janelle was still in love with him and that they were planning on getting back together.
Errol claims that he and Janelle had so much chemistry that in fact the two of them had sex multiple times on the 15th.
What time did she leave?
Well, technically, I'm the one who left.
What do you mean?
Errol Moore mentions that he has another girlfriend.
He says he took the baby to his other girlfriend's house.
Errol's new girlfriend's name is Candace Dean.
So the police are like, well, who is Candace Dean?
Errol told police that he and Candace had dated in high school, then she moved away for about a year, but when she returned, they picked up where they left off.
Janelle wasn't too happy about that, and she started sending Candace messages on social media.
Candace and Janelle were sworn mortal enemies.
Oh, girl, get out of here. He's got this now.
College Park detectives investigating the disappearance of 20-year-old Janelle Aaron are speaking with her ex-boyfriend, Errol Moore.
Errol claims that he and Janelle slept together on July 15th, the same day she disappeared.
And according to Errol, that wasn't his only sexual rendezvous that day.
When he left the apartment, he left to meet up with his girlfriend, Candace Dean.
Candace and Janelle were sworn mortal enemies.
Errol tells detectives the tension between Janelle and Candace reached its peak a few months earlier.
Errol claimed Janelle actually confronted him and Candace.
Oh, girl, get out of here. He's got this now. You think so?
Janelle, just leave us alone.
Errol says he's trying to get Janelle to leave, and then that's when he says Janelle took things to a whole nother level.
Janelle actually escalated it and slapped Errol across the face.
Errol claims he tried to keep his cool.
Errol just told her she needed to leave and she needed to calm down.
Errol said she finally left, but she and Candace never smoothed things over.
Do you think Candace could have harmed Janelle?
Nah, no way.
Errol told police that he knew that Candace hated Janelle and Janelle hated Candace, but he didn't think that she would want to hurt her.
However, detectives aren't so sure.
They want to speak with Candace immediately to get her side of the story.
So after wrapping up their interview with Errol, they bring Candace in for questioning.
So here's the deal, Candace. Janelle Aaron has been missing since July 15th, and we know the two of you have not been getting along.
So, I haven't seen her in months, and I plan to keep it that way.
Candace says that Errol was only spending time with Janelle because of the baby, and that Errol really didn't want to be with her, and he was truly in love with Candace.
Is that why he slept with her on the 15th before he met up with you?
What?
This information hits Candace hard. She starts crying. She's very emotional.
I can't believe he played me like that.
Candace, listen. Tell us the truth. Did you do anything to hurt Janelle?
No.
Candace admitted that she and Janelle hated each other, but she didn't have anything to do with her disappearance.
Candace confirms that Errol came over to her place on the evening of July 15th, around 7:30 p.m.
She said he went to spend the night with her and left the next day around noon. She never saw or heard from Janelle during that time.
Detectives are suspicious of Candace's story, but they can't hold her on a hunch.
While detectives aren't 100% sure that they can trust Candace, they have no evidence to hold her on, so they end up releasing her.
Without a body or confirmation of Janelle being dead, the police have their hands tied in a lot of ways.
However, when the lab results from the blood found in Janelle's apartment come back, it confirms everyone's worst fears.
The crime lab confirmed, in fact, that the blood within the apartment belonged to Janelle Aaron. We had positive identification at that point that that blood was hers.
At this point, detectives are worried it may be too late to save Janelle. It's clear she lost a lot of blood.
But who did this to her? When Janelle's best friend, Jasmine Clark, comes forward, detectives will get one step closer to answering that question.
Thank you for coming in today. We understand that you may have some information that will be useful to us.
The last time I talked to Janelle was July 15th. On the phone, Janelle was telling me about Tim, and she sounded really excited about this relationship. I remember asking her, well, what about Errol? And she seemed so done. Like, okay, what about him? She was so over it.
Girl, I'm packing up to leave as we speak.
But Jasmine says Errol soon interrupted their conversation.
Janelle! They started arguing, like a verbal altercation, and she was like, basically like, I'm gonna call you back. Basically, when he leaves, I'll call you back. And I said, okay.
Bye, girl.
Factually, Errol was the last person to be with Janelle.
The detectives asked me if I believed that Errol was capable of hurting Janelle, and yes, I did believe that.
Detectives need to get Errol more to tell them the truth.
After speaking with her best friend Jasmine, detectives investigating the disappearance of Janelle Aaron are more certain than ever that Janelle's ex-boyfriend, Errol Moore, knows what happened to her.
Janelle's best friend Jasmine overheard her arguing over the phone with Errol shortly before she disappeared.
And according to Janelle's friends, he was known to be violent with her.
The detectives asked me if I believed that Errol was capable of hurting Janelle, and yes, I did believe that.
So based on those facts and circumstances, we knew that it was highly likely that he had a direct involvement with Janelle's disappearance, but we had no proof. We had no eyewitnesses.
Detectives know that if they want any chance of finding Janelle alive, they're going to have to get Errol to come out with the truth.
Later that day, they bring him back in for a follow-up interview.
Welcome back, Errol.
They said, you know, Errol, you're not telling us the full story. We've done our own investigation, and we found some things that just simply don't add up.
What were you and Janelle arguing about that afternoon? Why did you fail to mention it the last time we spoke?
At this point, Errol cracks.
So what Errol Moore finally said was, you know what, it's true. What I'd been telling you wasn't the full story. Errol said, I got in an argument with her about Tim Williams.
Now, what does he have that I don't?
He's nice to me for one thing.
And I'm not nice to you?
Janelle fought back. She argued with him that he was with Candace. He was with somebody else too, so why did it matter if she had moved on?
Just leave me alone.
What? Nah.
Errol admits that the argument became more and more heated.
Errol claims Janelle then escalated the fight to a whole new level.
You're making a mistake. We should be a family.
Errol, I've had it with you.
At that point, Janelle, he says, grabbed a knife.
Errol says he grabbed Janelle's hand and that's when she dropped the knife, but he says she kept coming at him and he says that's when he put her in a chokehold.
And then just began choking her, and she began convulsing. After her convulsion, she fell down on the ground, and he said he could not get her up.
Janelle?
Well, what about the blood?
I asked him, did you cut her? Because there was a lot of blood in the house. And he said no, but she was bleeding out the mouth.
Errol said, I panicked and I left with the baby and I left with her things.
Look, I was just so in shock that the situation got so out of hand.
I said, well, where did you go? And he said, well, I went back to my girlfriend's house and I continued my life, basically.
I was confused. I was scared.
He said, I spent the weekend trying to figure out what to do.
And Errol said when a couple days went by, he knew he needed to do something.
As time passed, he was able to gather his thoughts, and then he realized that he had to go back and clean up the crime scene.
At first, he was hoping it was just a horrible nightmare. But when he opened the door, he saw Janelle lying in a pool of her own blood.
Errol didn't really know what to do with the body, but eventually he looked around and he saw a big blue bin that Janelle had used to move her things down to Atlanta. He grabbed the bin and placed her body in the bin.
Then he began cleaning up.
And what'd you do with her body? Tell us where she is, Errol.
He finally admits that he placed her in a wooded area near Sherwood Cemetery.
Look, you have to believe me. I didn't expect for any of this to happen.
Please stand up, Errol.
With Errol's confession, Clayton County Police arrest him, and they assemble a team to go out and recover Janelle's body.
We went out to Sherwood Cemetery and started doing a grid search.
Eventually they see something in the distance there. It looks like something covered in leaves, and they walk up and discover a blue bin.
What's inside that bin is the likes of which investigators have never seen.
Dear God.
In October of 2010, Errol Moore has finally admitted to killing his ex-girlfriend, Janelle Aaron.
He claimed he killed her in self-defense after she came at him with a knife, but investigators don't really buy his story.
After speaking with Errol, investigators have arrived at the location where he claims to have left Janelle's body inside a plastic bin. But they never could have prepared themselves for what they find.
What's inside that bin is the likes of which investigators have never seen.
Dear God.
The badly decomposed remains of Janelle Aaron.
Her body literally melted in that hot Atlanta heat.
Atlanta had a large amount of rain during the summertime. And unfortunately, with that large amount of rain, the actual plastic tote that her body was placed in filled up with water all the way to the top. There wasn't a lot left of her body.
The state of decomposition means proving cause of death will be difficult.
We could never figure out what actually cause of death was, because there was no physical evidence to say that she was stabbed, choked, because the body was so decomposed.
The news hits Janelle's loved ones like a ton of bricks.
They've informed us that they have found my sister's remains and that Errol led them to her. My first reaction, I screamed. I just screamed.
I remember they told me that she was deceased. And I remember just dropping down to my knees and crying. I remember like being around people and they like, what is wrong with him? Like, it just broke my heart.
I was heartbroken. I was destroyed. I couldn't understand how Errol was the one saying, come home, and this whole time it was you.
We had been suffering and searching and hoping and wanting and processing and dealing for over 3 months at this point. So the relief came in getting that information that we needed so that we could be at peace. There was minor relief in knowing that he was caught and that he wasn't going to be able to just live out here freely.
Errol is officially charged with Janelle's murder.
He was charged with 1 count of malice murder, 1 count of felony murder, 3 counts of concealing a body, and 1 count of tampering with evidence.
And when he goes on trial in April of 2012, prosecutors don't hold back.
One of the main thrusts of this case for the prosecution was the hypocrisy of it all. The hypocrisy of his actions and the hypocrisy of his words. That is, after she went missing in July, he spent the next 2 or 3 months talking about how much he missed her, talking about how much their baby needed her mother, and then to have it discovered that he knew where her remains were the entire time. And for months he knew, and for months he did nothing about it, while callously disregarding the pain and the suffering that her family was going through. And so that was the story we told.
Errol's defense team echoes the same version of events Errol told detectives, that he attacked Janelle in self-defense. But prosecutors aren't buying it.
Our theory of the case from beginning to end always was and still remains that this wasn't an act of self-defense. This was an act of rage.
Now, what does he have that I don't?
Just leave me alone.
What? Nah.
Janelle never came at Errol with a knife. She was simply trying to leave the apartment.
You ain't leaving.
Okay, can you stop?
I ain't letting you break up our family.
It's surmised that when she tried to leave, Errol slammed her to the ground, with the force of impact causing her to bleed out, resulting in the pool of blood found in the apartment.
This was an act of enraged young man responding to a situation that he could no longer control, and that is namely Janelle moving on and seeing a new guy and starting a new life. He has this personality type of narcissism. I'm gonna be the one to control this. I'm gonna be the one to prevail. And so it's that very personality type that led to the murder in the first place.
But after the jury retires to deliberate, they send shockwaves through the courtroom.
Some of the jury believes that Errol was telling the truth.
You have 12 jurors. You have to have an unanimous verdict. It has to be all 12. When they show what happened, they make a decision, guilty or not.
They can't reach a decision. So ultimately, the court is left to declare a mistrial.
I was extremely nervous when the mistrial happened and that he may get away with it. I was very worried. And he had been twisting the story and maneuvering it the entire time. So there's always that in the back of your mind, like they could possibly believe that. And he could possibly get away with it.
Errol Moore used the self-defense issue, which shows you even more that he really had no remorse for Janelle. If he did, he would take responsibility for it and not put the family through that trial again.
To go through a trial is just grueling in itself. To go through that process, especially with someone who you love and you're close with, but then to watch and hear a mistrial and to just feel like that person is getting away, even if it's just momentarily, that feeling of helplessness, that feeling of that person possibly getting away with taking your loved one from you and there's nothing you can do about it. I don't wish that feeling on anyone.
But prosecutors encourage Janelle's loved ones to keep the faith.
He doesn't get released on bond or nothing like that. They just try it again. To have a verdict, you have to have all 12 people make the same decision on it. It can't be majority.
So in April 2012, the second trial began. And honestly, I will say I didn't want to get my hopes up. I was hoping that this time around, justice would be served and we would get some progress, but didn't have my hopes up high for it.
This time, the district attorney's office presented basically the same evidence as last time, trying to show that this was not an accident, this was premeditated jealousy.
And this time, the jury agrees.
The jury in Clayton County found Errol Moore guilty of voluntary manslaughter, tampering with evidence, aggravated assault.
Voluntary manslaughter, meaning that Errol Moore did kill Janelle Aaron, but it was in a heat of passion. It wasn't a malice, intentional murder.
Clayton County judge sentenced Errol Moore to 36 years behind bars, which seems like not enough time in this case.
I was relieved when I heard the verdict to an extent, but unfortunately, my sister's life is over. She'll never get to know her daughter. My family and I will never get to speak to her again. We'll never get to see her again. It'll never be fair. It'll never be completely justified, in my opinion.
Eventually, he will be out. Hopefully, he matured and he forgave himself for his wrongs, and the world will too. But me personally, I never forgive him. A beautiful soul was taken away off jealousy and anger. We lost a great woman, a great mother, a great friend, a soulmate, a sister in this horrible, horrible fatal attraction.
I don't feel or believe that justice was served. This was very unfortunate, a tragedy. It was unnecessary and uncalled for, especially considering that Errol had a whole nother girlfriend. He took a life for nothing.
My niece is currently being taken care of by my aunt, and she is in a loving environment, and we're all working together to grow her and give her everything she needs to become a beautiful, amazing woman just like her mom. Janelle, she was a great mother, and she loved her daughter more than anything in this world. And so I just want her to be remembered for the best of who she was, not how she left.
Abuse is never okay. If you or someone you love is in an abusive relationship, there is help available. Call the Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799.
On the morning of December 14, 2012, the town of Newtown, Connecticut, woke up like any other small American community. The streets were quiet. The winter air was cold and still. Families prepared for another ordinary Friday. Parents rushed through morning routines, children searched for backpacks, coats, and lunch boxes. In homes across the town, there were conversations about weekend plans, holiday preparations, and the simple moments that make up everyday life. It was only 11 days before Christmas. For many families, the season was supposed to be filled with excitement. The smell of holiday meals, the glow of decorations, the anticipation of children waiting for presents. Newtown was the kind of place where people believed they knew their neighbors. Where children rode bicycles on familiar streets. Where parents felt comfortable letting their sons and daughters walk into a school building, because they believed it was one of the safest places their children could be. But before that day ended, the name Sandy Hook would become known around the world. A name that would forever carry grief. A name that would represent the unimaginable pain of families who lost their youngest loved ones. A name that would force an entire nation to confront one of its darkest moments. At Sandy Hook Elementary School, hundreds of children arrived that morning carrying the innocence of childhood. They were 6 and 7 years old. They worried about spelling tests, classroom activities, friendships, and whether they would get to sit next to their favorite classmate during lunch. They did not know that within minutes, their school would become the scene of one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. They did not know that some of the adults around them would make the ultimate sacrifice trying to protect them. They did not know that the sound of ordinary school life would soon be replaced by panic, confusion, and unimaginable fear. And no one in Newtown could have imagined that the person responsible for this tragedy was someone who had grown up among them. Someone who had once been a child himself. Someone who had walked through the same neighborhoods, attended schools in the same community, and lived in a house just minutes away from the place where the tragedy would unfold. His name was Adam Lanza. Before December 14, 2012, Adam Lanza was not a person known to the public. He was not a famous criminal. He was not someone whose name appeared in newspapers or on television. He was a deeply isolated young man whose life had slowly moved away from the outside world. Behind the walls of a quiet suburban home, Adam had become increasingly disconnected. He spent long periods alone. He avoided social contact. He disappeared into a private world filled with computers, information, and disturbing interests that would later become central to the investigation. For years, there were signs that something was wrong. Teachers noticed that he struggled to connect with other children. Family members saw him withdrawing further into himself. His behavior became increasingly unusual, and his relationship with the world around him grew weaker. But the warning signs did not reveal the full horror that was coming. Because tragedies like Sandy Hook are rarely the result of a single moment. They are often the result of many small pieces coming together over time. A person becoming more isolated. A mind becoming more consumed by dark ideas. A fascination becoming an obsession. A dangerous opportunity appearing. And eventually, one terrible decision changing the lives of countless people forever. On that morning, before heading to Sandy Hook Elementary School, Adam Lanza committed another devastating act. Inside his family home, he killed his own mother, Nancy Lanza. Nancy was not a stranger to him. She was the person who had cared for him throughout his life. She had supported him through his struggles. She had tried to understand him during the years when he became more withdrawn from society. To many people who knew her, Nancy was a devoted mother who wanted the best for her son. She had introduced Adam to activities she believed might help him connect with others. She had supported his interests. She had tried to provide stability during difficult years. But in the end, the very things that surrounded their home became part of the tragedy. After killing his mother, Adam took weapons from the house and drove toward Sandy Hook Elementary School. The distance was short, but the consequences of that journey would echo for generations. Around 9:30 in the morning, the school was operating normally. Teachers were teaching. Children were learning. The halls were filled with the sounds of young students. Then, suddenly, everything changed. The front entrance of the school became the point where an ordinary day turned into a nightmare. Within moments, teachers and staff realized something was terribly wrong. The people inside Sandy Hook Elementary were forced into a situation no school should ever experience. Teachers who had spent their careers caring for children suddenly faced a moment of unimaginable danger. Some reacted by trying to protect their students. Some locked doors. Some gathered children together and tried to keep them hidden. Some placed themselves between danger and the children they loved as if they were their own. In those terrifying minutes, the bravery of ordinary people became one of the defining parts of the story. The names of those who died would later become known across the world. Children like Charlotte Bacon, Daniel Bardun, Olivia Engel, Josephine Gay, Dylan Hockley, Madeline HSU, Catherine Hubbard, Chase Kowalski, Jesse Lewis, James Mottioli, Grace McDonnell, Emily Parker, Jack Pinto, Noah Posner, Caroline Providi, Jessica Ricos, Avielle Richman, Benjamin Wheeler, Alison Wyatt, and Anna Marquez Green. Each of them had a family. Each of them had a personality. Each of them had dreams that would never be fulfilled. They were not statistics. They were children who laughed, played, asked questions, created drawings, celebrated birthdays, and imagined their futures. Some wanted to become teachers. Some wanted to become athletes. Some simply wanted to grow older and discover the world waiting for them. But their futures ended inside a place that was supposed to protect them. Alongside them were 6 educators and school employees who dedicated their lives to helping children. Dawn Hochsprung, the school principal, who cared deeply about her students and staff. Mary Sherlach, the school psychologist who spent her days supporting children and families. Victoria Soto, a teacher remembered for her courage and devotion to her students. Anne-Marie Murphy, Lauren Rousseau, and Rachel Davino, who also lost their lives while serving the children of Sandy Hook. They were educators. They were protectors. They were members of a community that believed schools should be places of safety and hope. The attack lasted only a few minutes. But those minutes created a wound that would never completely disappear. When police officers arrived, they entered a scene that would remain with them for the rest of their lives. Children were evacuated. Teachers and survivors were led away from the building. Families gathered outside, desperately searching for information. Parents who had dropped their children off that morning waited for answers that many would never receive. Across Newtown, phones rang. Messages were sent. Television screens began showing images of police cars, emergency vehicles, and frightened families. At first, many people struggled to understand what had happened. A school shooting was already difficult enough to comprehend. But a shooting involving children in the earliest years of their lives seemed impossible. It was a moment when words failed. A moment when an entire nation stopped and asked the same question. How could this happen? The investigation that followed would attempt to uncover the story behind Adam Lanza, his final days, his motivations, and the events that led him to Sandy Hook. Investigators would search his home. They would examine his computers, his writings, his history, and his behavior. They would look for a reason. They would search for an explanation. But even after years of investigation, one haunting truth remained. There was no single answer that could explain the loss of 20 children and 6 dedicated adults. There was no explanation that could bring them back. There was only the memory of that December morning. A morning that began with ordinary hopes and ended with unimaginable sorrow. A morning that transformed a quiet Connecticut town into a symbol of grief. A morning that left behind a question that still remains. How does a community heal after losing so many innocent lives in a place that was supposed to be safe? This is the story of Sandy Hook. A story not only about the person who caused the tragedy, but about the people whose lives were taken, the families who continued forward carrying impossible pain, and the heroes who showed courage when the world around them collapsed. Because behind every tragedy are not just headlines. There are names. There are faces. There are families. And there are lives that mattered. Before Sandy Hook became a name associated with tragedy, Newtown, Connecticut, was a place many people described as a picture of quiet American life. Located in Fairfield County, surrounded by forests, rolling hills, and winding roads, Newtown carried the atmosphere of a small community where time seemed to move slower. It was a place where generations of families lived side by side, where neighbors often knew each other by name, and where childhood memories were created in familiar places. The town did not look like the setting of a national tragedy. It looked like the kind of place where people believed terrible things happened somewhere else. The streets were lined with homes decorated for the changing seasons. In autumn, the trees surrounding the town turned shades of orange and red. In winter, snow often covered rooftops and lawns, creating the peaceful scenery often associated with New England. The people who lived there valued stability. They valued family. They valued the feeling that their community was protected from the dangers that dominated headlines in larger cities. Newtown was not perfect, but it was comfortable. It was the kind of town where parents trusted schools, where children played outside, and where neighbors watched out for one another. For many families, moving to Newtown meant searching for a better environment to raise children. A place where kids could grow up surrounded by nature. A place where schools were respected. A place where parents believed their children had opportunities ahead of them. At the center of this community was Sandy Hook Elementary School. The school was not simply a building. It was a place filled with memories. Every morning, children walked through its doors carrying backpacks that were sometimes almost as large as their small bodies. They entered classrooms decorated with colorful artwork, alphabet posters, and projects created by young hands. For teachers, Sandy Hook was more than a workplace. It was a second home. The educators who worked there knew that their role extended far beyond teaching reading, mathematics, and science. They helped children understand the world around them. They encouraged curiosity. They comforted students when they were afraid. They celebrated birthdays, achievements, and small victories that meant everything to a child. The school served students from kindergarten through 4th grade. The children were among the youngest members of the Newtown community. They were still discovering who they were. They were learning how to write their names, how to make friends, how to solve problems, and how to dream about the future. For parents, dropping their children off at Sandy Hook each morning was an act of trust. They trusted the teachers. They trusted the staff. They trusted the walls of the building that surrounded their sons and daughters. That trust was what made the events of December 14, 2012, so devastating. Because the tragedy did not happen in a dangerous place. It happened in a place built for children. It happened in a place where parents believed their children were safe. Years before the shooting, Adam Lanza was also part of this same community. He was not an outsider who appeared suddenly. He had grown up in Newtown. His childhood unfolded in the same streets, where other children rode bicycles and played with friends. He attended local schools. He lived with his family in a neighborhood that looked almost identical to thousands of other suburban American neighborhoods. From the outside, his life appeared ordinary. But inside his world, things were changing. Adam Peter Lanza was born on April 22, 1992, in Exeter, New Hampshire. His early childhood included many experiences common among children his age. He was described as intelligent, with a strong memory and an ability to absorb information quickly. Teachers noticed that he could perform well academically. But they also noticed differences. Adam struggled socially. He found it difficult to communicate naturally with other children. Conversations, friendships, and everyday interactions that seemed simple for many children appeared challenging for him. As he grew older, those difficulties became more visible. While other children built friendships and became involved in activities, Adam increasingly separated himself. He preferred routines. He preferred being alone. The world outside his own interests became harder for him to navigate. During his childhood, professionals identified developmental concerns and later diagnosed him with autism spectrum disorder. However, investigators and experts who studied the case emphasized an important point: autism itself does not cause violence. Millions of people with autism live peaceful, productive lives. The tragedy of Sandy Hook cannot be explained by a diagnosis. Instead, investigators focused on a combination of factors that developed over time, including severe social isolation, psychological struggles, obsessive behaviors, and his growing fascination with previous acts of mass violence. As Adam entered adolescence, his isolation became more extreme. School became increasingly difficult. Eventually, he stopped attending traditional classes and continued his education through alternative methods. His connection to the outside world weakened. Friends became rare. Social activities disappeared. The teenage years, which are often filled with friendships, relationships, and experiences that shape identity, became a period of withdrawal. Inside his home, Adam spent long hours alone. He became increasingly focused on computers and online information. The internet became a place where he could explore topics without interacting with other people. Over time, investigators discovered that some of those interests were deeply disturbing. He researched previous mass shootings. He studied details about weapons. He collected information about acts of violence committed by others. The line between studying something and becoming obsessed with it became increasingly difficult to see. While the outside world continued moving forward, Adam seemed to retreat further into his own. His family noticed the distance. His mother, Nancy Lanza, remained one of the few people consistently present in his life. Nancy tried to support her son through his struggles. She arranged activities. She attempted to understand his needs. She adapted her life around his difficulties. People who knew Nancy described her as a caring mother who wanted to help Adam find a way to function in the world. But the relationship between mother and son also became increasingly complicated. Nancy was aware that Adam had serious challenges. She knew he was different. She knew he struggled. But even those closest to him could not fully understand what was happening inside his mind. In the years leading up to December 2012, Adam rarely left his room. The home that was supposed to be a place of comfort became the location where his isolation deepened. While neighbors continued their daily lives, unaware of what was happening behind closed doors, Adam was building a private world filled with information, routines, and disturbing thoughts. His connection to reality became more distant. His connection to other people became weaker. And slowly, almost invisibly, a path toward tragedy was forming. Yet even then, nobody in Newtown imagined what would happen. Nobody looked at the quiet streets and saw danger. Nobody looked at Sandy Hook Elementary School and imagined that one day it would become one of the most recognized crime scenes in modern American history. That was the cruel nature of the tragedy. There was no obvious warning visible to everyone. There was no single moment when the entire community realized something terrible was approaching. Life continued normally. Children went to school. Parents went to work. Teachers prepared lessons. Families planned for Christmas. And Adam Lanza remained hidden behind the walls of a quiet home, carrying thoughts that would eventually lead him toward an act that would forever change Newtown. The story of Sandy Hook is not only about what happened on December 14, 2012. It is also about the years before it. The small details. The missed connections. The growing distance between one person and the world around him. Because before the sound of gunfire echoed through Sandy Hook Elementary School, there was a long silence. A silence filled with warning signs, unanswered questions, and a community that had no idea how close it was to losing its innocence forever. Before the world knew the name Sandy Hook, the children inside that school were simply children. They were not symbols. They were not numbers. They were not names written in newspapers or remembered in documentaries. They were sons and daughters. Brothers and sisters. Friends and classmates. They were young lives still in the process of becoming something more. Each morning, they entered Sandy Hook Elementary School carrying the ordinary worries and dreams of childhood. They wondered about homework, friendships, classroom activities, and what they would do after school. They laughed at jokes that only children could understand. They shared snacks, traded stories, and looked forward to moments that seemed small but were precious. They had no idea that December 14, 2012, would become the last day of their lives. For their families, the memories of those children would become the most valuable things they had left. A drawing on the refrigerator. A favorite toy. A photograph from a birthday party. A video showing a child laughing. A voice that could never be heard again except through memories. The tragedy of Sandy Hook was not only about what happened inside a school building. It was about 20 children who had futures waiting for them. 20 children whose stories deserved to continue. Charlotte Bacon was 6 years old. She was remembered as a bright and energetic little girl who brought happiness to the people around her. Like many children her age, Charlotte had a personality that filled a room. She enjoyed spending time with her family and discovering the world around her with curiosity. Her parents saw a child who was growing every day, learning new things, developing her own interests, and becoming more independent. That morning, Charlotte went to school like any other day. She carried the hopes of a 6-year-old child. She carried the dreams of a family who believed they would watch her grow. She never came home. Daniel Bardun was 7 years old. Known affectionately by his family as Daniel, he was described as a loving child with a playful spirit. He enjoyed music and sports, and he had the kind of personality that made people smile. His family remembered him as a child who loved life. He was not just a victim of a tragedy. He was a son whose parents expected to see him graduate, celebrate birthdays, and discover who he would become. Those future moments disappeared in a matter of minutes. Olivia Engel was 6 years old. To those who knew her, Olivia was a child full of imagination and warmth. She loved performing and expressing herself. She represented the innocence and creativity that define childhood. At 6 years old, life was still a story waiting to be written. She had countless experiences ahead of her. Places she would never visit. People she would never meet. Dreams she would never have the chance to pursue. Josephine Gay was 7 years old. She was remembered as a kind and cheerful child who brought joy to her family. Her parents watched her grow through the simple milestones that mean everything to families. The first day of school. The first friendships. The first moments of discovering independence. On December 14th, her family lost not only a child. They lost every future memory that should have come after. Dylan Hockley was 6 years old. Dylan was described as loving and affectionate. His family spoke of his unique personality and the happiness he brought into their lives. He had a brother who loved him. He had parents who cared deeply for him. He had a world that was waiting for him. But his story ended far too soon. Madeline HSU was 6 years old. Known as a gentle and caring child, Madeline represented the quiet beauty of childhood. She was learning about friendship. She was learning about herself. She was discovering the world one day at a time. Her family had dreams for her future. Dreams that would never become reality. Catherine Hubbard was 6 years old. Catherine was remembered as a sweet and loving child who enjoyed animals and spending time with those she loved. Her family described her as someone who brought happiness into everyday moments. She had a kindness that people remembered. A presence that remained even after she was gone. Chase Kowalski was 7 years old. Chase loved sports and competition. He was active, enthusiastic, and full of energy. Like many children, he had heroes, interests, and dreams. He was a child who looked toward the future without fear. A future that was taken away before he could reach it. Jesse Lewis was 6 years old. Jesse became remembered not only for his young life, but also for an act of courage reported during the tragedy. His family described him as a determined and caring child. He loved his family. He loved his friends. He had a personality that stood out even at such a young age. Jesse was a reminder that courage is not limited by age. James Mottioli was 6 years old. James was known as a happy child who enjoyed playing and spending time with others. His family remembered his smile and his enthusiasm. He was the kind of child whose presence brought energy into a room. His life was filled with possibilities that would never be explored. Grace McDonnell was 7 years old. Grace loved art and creativity. She expressed herself through drawings and imagination. Her family remembered a child with a beautiful spirit and a unique way of seeing the world. Her artwork became a reminder of the creativity that lived inside her. Emily Parker was 6 years old. Emily was remembered as a loving daughter with a bright personality. Her family described her as someone who enjoyed making others happy. After her death, her father spoke publicly about her life, ensuring that people saw her not as a victim, but as a child filled with love, laughter, and dreams. Jack Pinto was 6 years old. Jack loved sports, especially football. He admired athletes and dreamed about the future. He was a child with heroes. A child with passions. A child who should have had the chance to grow older and create his own story. Noah Posner was 6 years old. Noah was one of the youngest victims. His family remembered him as intelligent, curious, and full of personality. He was a child who loved learning and exploring. His family would later become among those fighting to preserve the memory of Sandy Hook victims and challenge false claims that caused additional pain. Caroline Providi was 6 years old. Caroline was described as a happy and loving child. She brought joy to her family and friends. Her life represented the thousands of ordinary moments that make childhood meaningful. Jessica Ricos was 6 years old. Jessica loved horses and had a strong imagination. Her family remembered her enthusiasm and her dreams. She was a child who saw possibility everywhere. Avielle Richman was 6 years old. Avielle was remembered as a joyful child who loved music and dancing. Her family continued honoring her memory through efforts focused on helping others. Benjamin Wheeler was 6 years old. Benjamin was known as a curious and energetic child. He loved learning about the world around him. He was a child who asked questions, because he wanted to understand everything. Allison Wyatt was 6 years old. Allison was remembered as a loving and happy child. She had a family who adored her and a future that disappeared too soon. Anna Marquez Green was 6 years old. Anna came from a family filled with music and creativity. She was remembered for her joyful personality and her love of singing. Her family carried her memory forward, making sure that the world knew who she was. But Sandy Hook was not only the story of 20 children. It was also the story of 6 adults who spent their lives protecting and educating young people. Dawn Hochsprung was the principal of Sandy Hook Elementary School. She was a leader who cared deeply about her students and staff. She believed in creating a safe and welcoming environment. Mary Sherlach was the school psychologist. Her work focused on helping children navigate emotions, challenges, and difficult moments. Victoria Soto was a teacher remembered for her dedication and courage. She loved her students and placed their safety above her own. Anne-Marie Murphy, Lauren Rousseau, and Rachel Davino also dedicated their lives to helping children learn and grow. They entered the school that morning as educators. They left behind legacies of compassion and sacrifice. The people lost at Sandy Hook were not defined by the tragedy that took them. They were defined by the lives they lived before it. They were defined by family dinners, birthday celebrations, school projects, laughter, and love. The world remembers Sandy Hook because of the horror that happened there. But the families who lost loved ones remember something else. They remember children who smiled. Children who dreamed. Children who mattered. And long before Sandy Hook became a symbol of tragedy, these were simply 20 children and 6 educators who made their community a better place by being part of it. The morning of December 14, 2012, began with the kind of quiet routine that millions of families experience every day. The sun had risen over Newtown, Connecticut. The winter air was cold. The streets carried the familiar stillness of a December morning. In homes throughout the community, parents prepared their children for school. Jackets were zipped. Backpacks were picked up. Breakfast plates were cleared away. For many families, it was simply another school day. No one knew that this day would become permanently divided into 2 parts. Life before Sandy Hook. And life after. Inside Sandy Hook Elementary School, the morning followed its normal rhythm. Teachers welcomed students into classrooms. Children settled into their seats. Some talked about upcoming holiday plans. Some worked on assignments. Some laughed with friends. The school was filled with the sounds that belonged to childhood, small conversations, footsteps moving through hallways, pencils writing across paper, and teachers guiding young minds through another day of learning. The building represented safety. A place where parents believed their children were protected. A place where teachers believed they were making a difference. But several miles away, a different reality was unfolding. Inside his home, Adam Lanza was preparing for what would become one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. The investigation that followed would reveal that the morning began with another tragedy. Before going to Sandy Hook Elementary School, Adam Lanza killed his mother, Nancy Lanza. Nancy was found dead inside their Newtown home. The woman who had spent years caring for her son became the first victim of the violence that would soon reach the school. The details of those final moments remain deeply disturbing. A mother who had tried to support her son through years of struggles was suddenly gone. A quiet home that once represented family life became the beginning of a crime scene. After the attack on his mother, Adam gathered weapons and left the house. He was dressed in dark clothing and carried equipment that indicated preparation. He was not acting in a moment of sudden anger. The evidence collected later showed planning. A decision had already been made. A destination had already been chosen. And that destination was Sandy Hook Elementary School. The distance between his home and the school was only a short drive. For the people inside Sandy Hook, those minutes passed like any other. They continued teaching. They continued learning. They continued believing the day would end like every other school day. At approximately 9:35 in the morning, Adam Lanza arrived at the school. The first sign that something was wrong came when the entrance was violently breached. The sound shattered the normal atmosphere of the building. At first, some staff members did not immediately understand what was happening. Schools are places where unexpected sounds happen all the time. A dropped object. A loud noise from outside. A sudden interruption. The human mind often searches for ordinary explanations before accepting something terrifying. But within moments, the reality became impossible to ignore. There was danger inside the building. Teachers and staff reacted quickly. They did what they had been trained to do in emergencies. They tried to protect children. They tried to keep students away from danger. They tried to create barriers between a gunman and the young lives placed in their care. In classrooms throughout the school, teachers faced an impossible situation. The children depended on them. The children looked to them for safety. And in those moments, teachers became more than educators. They became protectors. Some locked classroom doors. Some moved children away from windows and entrances. Some whispered instructions, telling students to remain quiet. For children so young, the situation was almost impossible to understand. Many did not know why they were hiding. Many did not fully understand why their teachers were suddenly afraid. They only knew that something was wrong. They knew the adults they trusted were frightened. And they knew they had to follow their teachers' instructions. In 2 classrooms, the violence reached the youngest students in the school. Children who were just beginning their education. Children who had spent the morning learning letters, numbers, and simple lessons about the world. Children who should have been thinking about Christmas, family, and the excitement of growing up. Instead, they became victims of unimaginable violence. 20 children were killed that morning. Each one had a name. Each one had a family waiting for them. Each one had a future that was suddenly taken away. The teachers inside those classrooms faced the most terrifying moments of their lives. Some placed themselves between the attacker and their students. Some tried to comfort children during the chaos. Some gave their lives attempting to save others. Among those who died was Victoria Soto, a teacher whose actions became remembered as an example of extraordinary courage. She was not famous before that day. She was not someone the world knew. She was simply a teacher who cared about her students. But when danger entered her classroom, she made a choice that reflected the very reason many people become educators. To protect children. Principal Dawn Hochsprung also lost her life. She was a leader who had dedicated herself to the school community. Mary Sherlach, the school psychologist, was also killed while serving the children and families of Sandy Hook. Along with them were Anne-Marie Murphy, Lauren Rousseau, and Rachel Davino. 6 adults who went to work that morning expecting an ordinary day. 6 people who never imagined that their final moments would be defined by sacrifice. Outside the school, the first emergency calls began. Parents and residents reported hearing about a dangerous situation. Police vehicles rushed toward Sandy Hook Elementary. The peaceful streets of Newtown were suddenly filled with sirens. Emergency responders arrived knowing they were entering an active threat situation. But nothing could fully prepare them for what waited inside. Officers moved through the building. They searched classrooms. They evacuated survivors. They guided frightened children and staff members away from danger. For some children, the first moments outside the school were confusing. They walked out holding hands with classmates. They followed instructions from adults. They looked around at police officers and emergency vehicles, trying to understand why so many people were there. Many of them were too young to understand the full meaning of what had happened. But they understood fear. They understood that something terrible had happened. Shortly after police arrived, Adam Lanza died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The attack was over. The violence that lasted only minutes had ended. But for Newtown, the nightmare was only beginning. Because when the gunfire stopped, the questions began. Parents searched for information. Families waited for phone calls. The community gathered, hoping that somehow the reports were wrong. Many people refused to believe that children could have been lost inside their own school. They wanted another explanation. A misunderstanding. A mistake. Anything other than the truth. But slowly, the reality became clear. The names of the victims began to emerge. The world learned that the youngest victims were only 6 years old. The images of families waiting outside the school captured the pain of a community facing something no community should ever experience. Parents stood in silence. Some held each other. Some cried. Some waited for news that would change their lives forever. The tragedy at Sandy Hook was not measured only by the number of people killed. It was measured by the empty chairs that remained. The unopened birthday presents. The bedrooms that became memorials. The family photographs that suddenly became reminders of someone who would never return. In less than 10 minutes, Adam Lanza had created a tragedy that would affect thousands of people. But behind the headlines and statistics were human stories. A teacher who chose courage. A principal who dedicated her life to children. Parents who lost their sons and daughters. A community forced to face the unimaginable. December 14, 2012, began as a normal winter morning in Newtown. By the time the sun set, it had become one of the darkest days in American history. And for the families of Sandy Hook, the world would never look the same again. When the sound of gunfire finally stopped inside Sandy Hook Elementary School, a different kind of silence began. It was not the peaceful silence of a winter morning in Newtown. It was the silence left behind after unimaginable violence. Outside the school, police vehicles filled the streets. Emergency lights reflected against nearby houses. Officers moved quickly, carrying out the difficult task of securing the building, protecting survivors, and understanding the full scale of what had happened. Only minutes earlier, Sandy Hook Elementary had been a place of learning. Now it had become a crime scene. For the law enforcement officers who entered the building that morning, nothing about the situation was ordinary. Many officers had responded to emergencies before. They had seen accidents, crimes, and moments of human suffering. But walking into a school and discovering that so many children had been killed was something they would never forget. The first priority was survival. Officers searched classroom by classroom. They moved carefully through hallways that had been filled with children only moments earlier. They evacuated those who were still alive. Teachers and students who had managed to survive were guided out of the building, away from the danger that had changed their lives forever. Outside, the scene became a mixture of urgency and heartbreak. Parents arrived looking for answers. Some rushed toward the school hoping to find their children. Others stood frozen, waiting for information. In those early moments, many families were trapped between hope and fear. A phone call could bring relief. A phone call could also destroy everything. The community waited for names to be released. They waited for confirmation. They waited for a reality that many people still could not accept. Inside the school, investigators began the difficult process of documenting what had happened. Every classroom, every piece of evidence, every detail. The investigation would become one of the largest and most emotionally difficult investigations in Connecticut history. The goal was not only to understand how the attack happened. Investigators needed to understand why. They needed to discover who Adam Lanza was, what led him to commit such violence, and whether there were warning signs that could have prevented the tragedy. The first major focus quickly became the gunman himself. Adam Lanza was found dead inside the school. Because he did not survive, investigators could not question him. There would be no interrogation. No courtroom testimony. No direct explanation from the person responsible. The answers would have to be found through the traces he left behind. And investigators knew they would have to look carefully. They began with his home. The house where Adam had lived with his mother became one of the most important locations in the investigation. Inside, authorities discovered the environment where Adam had spent much of his final years. They found weapons. They found ammunition. They found computers and electronic devices. They found documents and personal materials that could provide insight into his thoughts and behavior. Every object became a possible clue. Every digital record became a possible piece of the puzzle. Investigators searched through his online activity, his files, and his personal history. They wanted to understand what was happening during the years when Adam became increasingly isolated. They examined his fascination with previous mass shootings. They looked at his interest in firearms. They studied the information he had collected. They tried to determine when his thoughts moved from curiosity into obsession. But the deeper investigators looked, the more complicated the picture became. Adam Lanza did not leave behind a simple explanation. There was no single document explaining his actions. No clear message revealing a specific motive. No final statement that could answer the questions haunting the families and the nation. Instead, investigators found pieces. Pieces of a troubled individual who had slowly withdrawn from society. Pieces of someone who spent years disconnected from others. Pieces of someone whose interests had become increasingly focused on violence. But pieces were not the same as answers. The investigation also examined Adam's relationship with his mother, Nancy Lanza. Her death added another layer of tragedy to the case. Nancy had owned firearms legally. She had introduced Adam to shooting as a recreational activity. She believed firearm knowledge was a responsible skill. To people who knew her, she was not someone who appeared dangerous. She was a mother trying to help her son. But investigators discovered that Adam had gained access to the weapons stored in their home. That access became one of the most important questions surrounding the tragedy. How had a person experiencing severe isolation and psychological struggles gained access to the tools used in such destruction? The investigation examined not only Adam's actions, but also the circumstances that allowed those actions to happen. As detectives continued working, they also reconstructed Adam's final days. They studied his movements. They examined his purchases. They reviewed his communications and online activity. They attempted to understand the planning behind the attack. The evidence suggested that the shooting was not an impulsive decision made in a moment of anger. It involved preparation. Adam had researched previous attacks. He had studied details about other mass shooters. He had developed a disturbing fascination with violence that continued for years. The investigators' task was to connect those pieces and create a timeline. But while law enforcement searched for answers, the families of Sandy Hook faced a reality no investigation could change. 20 children were gone. 6 educators were gone. The discovery process inside the crime scene represented something much larger than collecting evidence. It represented the beginning of a long journey toward understanding. For the victims' families, there would never be a moment when the investigation could truly bring closure. No evidence report could replace a child. No explanation could fill an empty bedroom. No conclusion could erase the pain of losing someone so young. In the days following the shooting, the community transformed from a place of ordinary life into a place of mourning. Memorials appeared throughout Newtown. People left flowers, candles, stuffed animals, and handwritten messages. Strangers from around the world sent condolences. The name Sandy Hook became known internationally. But for the people who lived there, it was not a headline. It was home. It was the school where their children learned. It was the place where families had trusted their loved ones would be safe. As investigators continued gathering evidence, another challenge emerged. The public wanted answers immediately. People wanted to know why. They wanted to understand what could create such violence. They wanted someone or something to blame. But the investigation revealed a painful reality. There was no simple explanation. Adam Lanza's story was not one of a single event. It was a complicated combination of personal struggles, isolation, access to weapons, and a growing obsession with previous acts of violence. Understanding those factors would take years. And even after investigators completed their work, many questions would remain. Because some tragedies leave behind evidence. They leave behind reports. They leave behind timelines. But they do not always leave behind satisfying answers. Sandy Hook was one of those tragedies. The crime scene could be documented. The timeline could be reconstructed. The evidence could be analyzed. But the emotional damage could not be measured. For the families who lost loved ones, December 14, 2012, would always remain the day everything changed. And for investigators, it became the beginning of a search through darkness, a search for clues hidden inside the life of Adam Lanza, hoping to understand how a quiet community could become the scene of one of the most devastating crimes in modern American history. In the days after the Sandy Hook tragedy, the world wanted answers. People wanted to understand how such an unimaginable event could happen in a small Connecticut town. They wanted to know who Adam Lanza was, what drove him toward violence, and whether there had been moments when someone could have stopped what was coming. But for investigators, the search for answers was not simple. Unlike many criminal cases, there was no suspect to interrogate. There was no courtroom confession. There was no final conversation that revealed his intentions. Adam Lanza was dead, and the only way to understand him was through the evidence he left behind. The investigation became a journey through fragments of a life that had become increasingly isolated. Every document, every computer file, every photograph, every record, every conversation with people who had known him. All of it became part of a massive effort to reconstruct the path that led to December 14, 2012. The investigation was led by multiple agencies, including the Connecticut State Police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Hundreds of investigators, analysts, and specialists worked to examine the crime scene, analyze evidence, and build a timeline of events. The scale of the operation reflected the magnitude of the tragedy. This was not only an investigation into a shooting. It was an attempt to understand one of the most devastating attacks against children in American history. One of the first questions investigators faced was the most obvious. Why Sandy Hook? Why had Adam Lanza chosen that school? The answer was deeply disturbing. Investigators discovered that Lanza had attended Sandy Hook Elementary years earlier. The school was not a random location. It was a place connected to his own childhood. A place where he had once been a student. That detail created even more questions. What memories did he associate with the school? Why had he returned to that location years later? Was the attack connected to something from his past? Investigators explored every possibility. They reviewed his educational history. They spoke with former teachers. They examined records from his childhood. They tried to understand whether there was a specific event that triggered his decision. But no single moment explained everything. Instead, investigators found a pattern that had developed over many years. Adam Lanza had gradually withdrawn from society. As a child, he showed signs of social difficulty. As a teenager, his isolation increased. As a young adult, he became almost completely disconnected from the outside world. People who knew him described someone who lived according to strict routines. He avoided many forms of communication. He rarely interacted with others. The world outside his room seemed to become something distant and uncomfortable. His mother, Nancy, remained one of the few consistent relationships in his life. But even that relationship had become complicated. Nancy tried to support Adam. She tried to accommodate his needs. She attempted to provide him with activities and structure. But as Adam became more isolated, the challenges grew. Investigators later learned that Nancy had become concerned about his condition. She understood that he was struggling. However, she did not know the full extent of the thoughts developing inside his mind. She could not see the path he was moving toward. And neither could the people around him. One of the most important parts of the investigation involved examining Adam's digital life. His computer became a window into the private world he had created. Investigators discovered that he spent significant amounts of time researching mass shootings and previous acts of extreme violence. He studied details about other attackers. He collected information about weapons. He analyzed crimes committed by people who had become infamous after carrying out mass killings. For investigators, this was one of the most disturbing discoveries. The violence did not appear suddenly. It had occupied his attention for a long period of time. The attack was not simply a spontaneous act. It appeared to be the result of years of obsession and preparation. Investigators also examined writings and personal documents found after the shooting. They searched for clues about his emotional state. They looked for explanations. They hoped to find a clear motive. But instead, they encountered a complicated and troubling picture. Adam Lanza had left behind many questions, but very few answers. There was no manifesto explaining his actions. There was no final message expressing regret. There was no explanation that could make sense of what happened. The absence of a clear motive became one of the most frustrating parts of the investigation. In many criminal cases, investigators can identify a specific reason. Money, revenge, personal conflict, a desire for power. But Sandy Hook did not fit easily into those categories. The attack seemed connected to a mixture of psychological struggles, extreme isolation, fascination with previous mass violence, and access to firearms. Experts who studied the case emphasized that mental health alone could not explain the tragedy. Millions of people experience mental health challenges without ever becoming violent. The investigation focused instead on the combination of factors that came together in this particular case. A person who had become increasingly detached. A person who developed a dangerous obsession. A person who had access to deadly weapons. A person who reached a point where violence became his chosen action. Another major part of the investigation involved examining the firearms used in the attack. Authorities traced the weapons and studied how they were obtained. The presence of multiple firearms and ammunition showed that the attack involved preparation. This raised broader questions about firearm access and responsibility. Those questions would later become central to national debates across the United States. While investigators worked through evidence, the families of victims experienced a completely different reality. For them, the investigation was not about solving a mystery. They already knew the most painful truth. Their children were gone. Their loved ones were gone. Every new report, every new detail, forced them to relive the tragedy. The investigation might have been focused on Adam Lanza, but the consequences belonged to the families he left behind. Parents who once planned birthday parties now planned memorials. Families who once looked toward the future now learned how to live with permanent loss. The investigation continued for months. Authorities interviewed witnesses, analyzed evidence, reviewed records, built timelines. But the deeper they went, the clearer one painful truth became. There was no single warning sign that explained everything. There was no single person who could answer every question. There was no simple way to explain how a young man, from a quiet Connecticut community, became responsible for such unimaginable destruction. Eventually, investigators released their findings. The official reports provided a detailed account of Adam Lanza's background, his preparation, and the events leading to the attack. But even a complete report could not provide what many people wanted most. A reason that felt large enough to explain the loss of 20 children and 6 educators. A reason that could somehow match the scale of the tragedy. But some crimes leave behind a painful reality. The evidence can show what happened. It can show how it happened. It can show who was responsible. But sometimes, it cannot fully explain why. Sandy Hook became one of those cases. The investigation uncovered the timeline. It uncovered the preparation. It uncovered the warning signs hidden within Adam Lanza's life. But the central question remained. How could a person who once walked through the same community as everyone else become the source of such unimaginable pain? That question would continue long after the investigation ended. And as the country searched for answers, another battle was beginning, a battle over prevention, responsibility, and how to stop another tragedy from happening again. For investigators working on the Sandy Hook case, the greatest challenge was not identifying what happened. The facts were clear. On the morning of December 14, 2012, Adam Lanza entered Sandy Hook Elementary School and killed 20 children and 6 educators before taking his own life. The timeline could be reconstructed. The crime scene could be examined. The victims could be identified. But the question that remained unanswered was the one that haunted investigators, families, and an entire nation. Why? What happened inside the mind of a person who carried out such unimaginable violence? The breakthrough in understanding the case did not come from one single discovery. It came from putting together thousands of small pieces. A childhood history. A pattern of isolation. A collection of disturbing interests. Digital records. Personal writings. Conversations with people who had known Adam Lanza throughout his life. Slowly, investigators began to reconstruct the path that led to that December morning. And what emerged was not the story of one sudden decision. It was the story of a person who had spent years moving further away from the world around him. Adam Lanza's life had changed gradually. There was no single day when everything suddenly became different. Instead, there were years of withdrawal. Years of isolation. Years of behaviors that became increasingly difficult for those around him to understand. As a child, Adam had shown signs of intelligence and strong academic ability. He could absorb information quickly. He had an exceptional memory. But social interaction remained a challenge. The simple exchanges that helped most children build friendships seemed much more difficult for him. Making conversation. Understanding social situations. Connecting emotionally with others. These challenges followed him as he grew older. While many children moved toward greater independence, Adam moved in the opposite direction. His world became smaller. The people around him became fewer. His daily life became increasingly controlled by strict routines and personal interests. Eventually, he withdrew almost completely. The outside world became something he observed rather than participated in. His computer became his connection to information. But that connection also exposed him to darker subjects. Investigators discovered that Adam had developed a deep fascination with previous mass shootings. He studied attackers from earlier tragedies. He examined details about their methods. He collected information about the events that made them infamous. For investigators, this was a critical discovery. It suggested that the Sandy Hook attack was not an isolated act that appeared without warning. The idea of mass violence had occupied his thoughts for years. He had studied it, analyzed it, returned to it repeatedly. The investigation also revealed that Adam had developed an intense interest in firearms. His mother, Nancy Lanza, owned several guns legally. She had taken Adam shooting and believed firearm training could be a responsible activity. She likely never imagined that something she viewed as education and recreation would later become connected to such horror. Nancy was not described by those who knew her as a violent person. She was a mother who struggled to help her son. She adapted her life around his needs. She searched for ways to support him. But investigators found that Adam's relationship with weapons had become far different from his mother's intentions. For him, firearms became connected with the violent scenarios he had studied. The investigation also examined his final months. During that period, Adam became even more isolated. He rarely interacted with others. He spent much of his time alone. His communication with the outside world became extremely limited. Neighbors saw little of him. Many people who lived nearby had no idea what was happening inside the house. From the outside, it remained an ordinary home in an ordinary neighborhood. But inside, Adam was becoming increasingly detached. One of the most important discoveries came from examining his personal files and electronic records. Investigators found evidence that he had carefully researched previous attacks. He had studied details about school shootings. He had examined the behavior of other perpetrators. He appeared fascinated by the scale of destruction they had created. The investigation suggested that Adam wanted to understand these attackers. And eventually, he became one of them. But even with all this information, investigators faced a difficult reality. Understanding the path was not the same as finding a simple explanation. There was still no single event that caused the tragedy. There was no argument. No personal revenge. No specific person he blamed. No clear message explaining his actions. Instead, there was a combination of factors. A young man who became increasingly disconnected. A mind consumed by violent material. A growing obsession with previous attacks. Access to weapons. And a final decision that destroyed countless lives. The investigation also examined why Adam chose Sandy Hook Elementary School. This question remained especially painful because the location was connected to his own childhood. He had once been a student there. He had walked through those hallways years earlier. He had sat in classrooms where other children later lost their lives. The school represented a place from his past. But investigators could not determine exactly what meaning Sandy Hook held for him. Whether it represented anger, memory, symbolism, or simply opportunity remained uncertain. There was no surviving explanation. Only evidence and interpretation. The official investigation eventually concluded that Adam Lanza had acted alone. There was no evidence that another person planned or assisted the attack. There was no larger conspiracy. There was only one individual whose actions created one of the darkest days in American history. The breakthrough in the case was not a dramatic confession or a hidden message. It was the realization that Sandy Hook was the final stage of a long process. A process where warning signs existed, but were scattered and difficult to understand. A process where many people saw pieces of the story, but never saw the complete picture. A process where a person became increasingly separated from the world until violence became the final expression of his obsession. For the families of the victims, however, understanding Adam Lanza could never provide what they truly wanted. It could not bring back their children. It could not restore the futures that disappeared. It could not erase the empty chairs, the silent bedrooms, or the memories of the last morning they spent together. The investigation answered many questions. But it could never answer the question that mattered most to those who lost someone. Why did this happen to them? Why their child? Why their family? Why a school filled with children? Those questions remained. As the investigation moved toward its conclusion, Sandy Hook became more than a criminal case. It became a national conversation about safety, responsibility, mental health, and violence. The tragedy forced millions of people to confront uncomfortable questions. Could something have been done differently? Could warning signs have been recognized? Could another family be protected from experiencing the same pain? Those questions would continue for years. Because the legacy of Sandy Hook was not only found in investigative reports. It was found in the memories of the victims. In the voices of their families. In the determination of people who refused to let their loved ones be remembered only for the way they died. And as the country searched for answers, one truth remained impossible to ignore. The most important stories from Sandy Hook were never about the person who caused the tragedy. They were about the people whose lives were taken. The children who should have grown older. The teachers who should have continued teaching. The families who should have celebrated countless future moments together. They were the reason the world needed to understand what happened. Not to explain away the horror, but to remember what was lost. In many criminal cases, the pursuit of justice follows a familiar path. Investigators identify a suspect. A suspect is arrested. A trial begins. Evidence is presented. A verdict is delivered. A sentence is announced. But Sandy Hook was different. The person responsible for the massacre would never stand before a judge. Adam Lanza would never sit in a courtroom. He would never answer questions from prosecutors. He would never hear the voices of the families whose lives he destroyed. The justice system could not provide the traditional ending that many people expected. There would be no dramatic trial. No testimony. No final confrontation between the families and the person who caused their suffering. Instead, justice in the Sandy Hook case became something more complicated. It became the search for truth. The effort to understand what happened. The effort to honor the victims. And the effort to prevent another tragedy from happening again. After the shooting, investigators continued examining every detail of Adam Lanza's life. The official investigation focused on creating the most complete picture possible. Authorities needed to understand his background, his preparation, and the circumstances that allowed the attack to occur. The goal was not only to document the crime. It was to answer the questions that remained after the violence ended. How had Adam Lanza reached this point? Were there warning signs? Could anyone have recognized what was happening? Could anything have been done differently? The investigation eventually revealed a disturbing pattern. Adam Lanza had become increasingly isolated during the years before the shooting. He had withdrawn from almost every part of normal social life. His communication with others became limited. His interests became increasingly focused on disturbing subjects. His fascination with mass violence continued for years. But investigators also found that there was no single moment when his future actions became obvious. There was no clear announcement of his intentions. No public threat that revealed exactly what he planned to do. No simple explanation that could have allowed someone to stop him. This was one of the most painful realities of the case. Many people wanted a clear answer. They wanted to know who was responsible beyond Adam Lanza. They wanted to know if there was a person who could have intervened. They wanted to know if the tragedy could have been prevented. But the investigation showed a far more complicated picture. A series of personal struggles. A history of isolation. A dangerous fascination with violence. And access to weapons. Together, these factors created the circumstances that led to December 14, 2012. But for the families of the victims, the investigation was never only about understanding Adam Lanza. Their focus was on the people they lost. The children. The teachers. The loved ones who would never return. For them, justice meant protecting the memory of those who died. It meant making sure their sons and daughters were remembered as more than victims. They were children who loved music, sports, art, animals, and family. They were children who laughed. Children who asked questions. Children who had dreams. Their lives deserved to be remembered beyond the tragedy. In the months and years after Sandy Hook, many families became involved in efforts to address gun violence prevention. They shared their experiences publicly. They spoke about their children. They worked to turn personal grief into a broader conversation about safety and responsibility. For some families, advocacy became a way to continue their connection with the loved ones they lost. They could not watch their children grow. They could not attend future birthdays. They could not see graduations or weddings. But they could fight to create a world where fewer families experienced the same pain. The tragedy also had a major impact on the national debate over gun laws in the United States. Because Sandy Hook involved young children inside an elementary school, the emotional response across the country was enormous. People gathered at memorials. Communities held vigils. Religious leaders, politicians, and ordinary citizens spoke about the need for change. Many called for stronger firearm regulations. Others debated the role of existing laws and individual rights. The discussion became one of the most intense political debates in modern American history. But beyond politics, there was a shared grief. A feeling that something had been lost. Something that extended beyond one town in Connecticut. The name Sandy Hook became recognized worldwide. For many people, it represented a heartbreaking question. How could a place designed to protect children become a place where children were taken from their families? The tragedy also led to increased attention toward school security. Schools across the country reviewed emergency procedures. Districts examined safety protocols. Communities discussed how to respond to potential threats. The goal was not to live in fear. The goal was to find ways to protect children while preserving the environment where they learn and grow. But as the years passed, another painful chapter emerged. The families of Sandy Hook victims became targets of false claims and conspiracy theories. Despite overwhelming evidence, some individuals falsely claimed that the shooting had never happened, or that the victims were not real. For families who had already experienced unimaginable loss, these claims created another layer of suffering. They had lost their children. They had buried their loved ones. And then they were forced to defend the reality of their own grief. Some families described being harassed and targeted because they publicly shared their stories. The pain was not limited to December 14, 2012. It continued afterward in ways they never expected. Eventually, legal action was taken against individuals who spread false claims about Sandy Hook. One of the most significant cases involved families challenging the spread of harmful misinformation. The outcome sent a message that false statements about real victims could have serious consequences. But even legal victories could not erase the emotional damage caused. No courtroom decision could return the years stolen from those families. No financial settlement could replace a child. No apology could undo the pain. The true meaning of justice after Sandy Hook was therefore not found in punishment. The person responsible had already died. Instead, justice became about memory. About truth. About refusing to allow the victims to disappear behind headlines. The names of the children became more important than the name of the attacker. Charlotte. Daniel. Olivia. Josephine. Dylan. Madeline. Catherine. Chase. Jesse. James. Grace. Emily. Jack. Noah. Caroline. Jessica. Aviel. Benjamin. Allison. Anna. And the educators who gave their lives protecting them. Dawn. Mary. Victoria. Anne-Marie. Lauren. Rachel. Their stories became the center of remembrance. Years after the tragedy, people continued returning to Newtown. They visited memorials. They left flowers. They wrote messages. They remembered. Because while the investigation into Adam Lanza eventually ended, the story of Sandy Hook did not. The families continued living with the consequences. The community continued healing. The nation continued debating difficult questions. And the memory of that morning remained. Sandy Hook showed that justice is not always a sentence handed down in a courtroom. Sometimes justice is the truth being preserved. Sometimes justice is ensuring that innocent lives are remembered. Sometimes justice is choosing compassion after experiencing unimaginable pain. The tragedy began with violence. But the legacy of Sandy Hook has also been shaped by love. The love of parents for their children. The love of teachers for their students. The love of a community that refused to forget. And that became the most powerful response to the darkness of December 14, 2012. In the days after the Sandy Hook tragedy, Newtown, Connecticut, became a place where the entire world seemed to stop and look. The quiet streets that had once represented ordinary suburban life were suddenly filled with reporters, emergency vehicles, grieving families, and people searching for ways to express their sorrow. But behind the cameras and the headlines was a community trying to survive something that no community should ever have to face. The people of Newtown were not simply witnesses to history. They were the people who had to wake up every morning afterward and continue living in the same place where their world had changed forever. They had to drive past familiar streets. They had to see the school. They had to remember the children who would never return. The pain was not something they could leave behind when the news cycle moved on. For the families who lost loved ones, grief became a permanent part of their lives. The first days after the shooting were filled with disbelief. Many parents struggled to understand how their child could be gone. The last morning they spent together became permanently preserved in their memories. A goodbye before school. A hug at the front door. A simple conversation. Small moments that had once seemed ordinary became priceless. Some parents remembered the clothes their children wore that morning. Some remembered the words they said before leaving home. Some remembered promises they made about the future. Promises like seeing them grow older, watching them graduate, celebrating birthdays. Those moments would never happen. And that was the cruelest part of the tragedy. The loss was not only about the day itself. It was about every future day that would never come. Every holiday without them. Every family photograph with an empty space. Every milestone they would never reach. For teachers and staff members who survived, the aftermath brought another kind of pain. They had entered the school that morning as educators. They left carrying memories that would stay with them forever. Some struggled with the emotional impact of returning to normal life. How could someone return to teaching after experiencing something so devastating? How could a classroom ever feel completely safe again? For many survivors, healing was not a straight path. There were good days and difficult days. Moments when they felt strength. Moments when memories returned unexpectedly. The sounds, the fear, and the confusion of that morning remained with them. Emergency responders also carried their own memories. Police officers, firefighters, medical personnel, and investigators who entered Sandy Hook Elementary were exposed to scenes that many described as among the most difficult experiences of their careers. They had responded because that was their duty. They had entered because people needed help. But they were also human beings. They were parents. They were members of communities. They were people who could not simply forget what they saw. The tragedy affected not only those inside the school. It affected the entire town. Newtown became connected by shared grief. People who had never met before supported one another. Neighbors brought food to families. Strangers left messages of sympathy. Memorials appeared throughout the community. Flowers covered public spaces. Candles burned in remembrance. Children's toys were placed as symbols of the young lives lost. Across America, communities held candlelight vigils. People gathered in churches, parks, schools, and public spaces. They stood together in silence. They prayed. They cried. They remembered. The tragedy created a moment of national mourning. Millions of people, who had never visited Newtown, felt connected to the families there. Many parents looked at their own children and imagined the unbearable pain of losing them. The victims were from one small town. But the grief was felt across the country. In Washington, the tragedy led to renewed discussions about gun violence, school safety, and mental health. The public debate became intense. Some argued that stronger gun regulations were necessary to prevent future tragedies. Others focused on different approaches, including security measures and mental health resources. The conversations were often emotional and deeply divided. But at the center of those debates were the victims. The children who had gone to school expecting a normal day. The teachers who had dedicated their lives to education. The families who suddenly became advocates, because their personal tragedies became part of a national conversation. For many relatives of the victims, speaking publicly was not something they originally wanted. They were ordinary people. Parents. Siblings. Friends. They had never planned to become public figures. But after losing their loved ones, many felt a responsibility to keep their memories alive. They shared stories about who their children really were. They talked about their personalities, their favorite activities, their dreams. They wanted the world to know that these children were more than victims of a tragedy. They were individuals. They had unique voices. They had unique personalities. They mattered. Over time, Sandy Hook became a symbol. But symbols can sometimes hide the human reality behind them. A symbol can become a headline, a statistic, a political argument. But for the families, it remained personal. It was a daughter, a son, a brother, a sister, a friend, a teacher, a person who was loved. One of the most painful developments, after Sandy Hook, was the spread of conspiracy theories that denied the tragedy happened. For families already carrying unimaginable grief, these claims created additional suffering. Some people questioned their experiences. Some attacked their memories. Some harassed grieving families online. The families had already endured the worst moment of their lives. Now they were forced to defend the reality of their loss. They repeatedly shared photographs. They told stories. They described their children. They showed the world that behind every name was a real person. A child who laughed. A child who played. A child who was loved. Eventually, legal battles were fought over some of the false claims made about Sandy Hook. These cases became part of a larger conversation about misinformation and the harm it can cause. The families argued that spreading lies about victims of tragedy created real emotional damage. The legal consequences became a reminder that words can have consequences, especially when they target people who are already suffering. But even with accountability, the pain remained. Healing after Sandy Hook was not about forgetting. It was about learning how to live while carrying memories. For the families, moving forward did not mean leaving their loved ones behind. It meant finding ways to honor them. Some created foundations. Some supported causes. Some worked with communities. Some simply continued living each day, while keeping their children's memories alive. The names of the victims became associated with acts of kindness, education, and remembrance. The world learned about their lives, their interests, their personalities, their dreams. The children of Sandy Hook became remembered not only because of how they died. They became remembered because of how they lived. More than a decade later, Newtown continues to carry the memory of that day. The town has changed. The people have changed. The world has changed. But the importance of remembering has remained. Because tragedies like Sandy Hook are not only moments in history. They are reminders of human lives. They remind us that behind every statistic is a family. Behind every headline is a person. Behind every tragedy are stories that deserve to be told with dignity and compassion. The morning of December 14, 2012, began with children walking into school. Children who expected another ordinary day. Children who should have had decades ahead of them. Instead, they became part of a story that the world would never forget. But the final chapter of Sandy Hook is not only about loss. It is also about love. The love parents have for children they will always remember. The love teachers showed their students. The love of a community that came together after unimaginable darkness. And the determination to ensure that those 20 children and 6 educators are never remembered only for the tragedy that took them. They are remembered because they lived. They are remembered because they mattered. And they are remembered because their stories continue. More than a decade has passed since the morning of December 14, 2012. The world has changed in many ways since then. Technology has advanced. Generations of children have grown older. New events have filled the headlines. But for the families of Sandy Hook, time does not move in the same way. For them, there is still a before and an after. There is still the morning when their child left for school. And there is still the moment when everything changed forever. The passage of time does not erase grief. It changes the way people carry it. In Newtown, memories of Sandy Hook remain part of everyday life. The community has continued forward, but it has never forgotten. The names of the victims are still spoken. The stories of their lives are still shared. The moments they never got to experience are still remembered. Because the legacy of Sandy Hook is not only about the violence that happened inside the school. It is about the lives that existed before that moment. 20 children who had personalities, dreams, and futures. 6 educators who dedicated themselves to helping young people. A community that discovered unimaginable strength after unimaginable loss. The tragedy became one of the most studied and discussed mass shootings in modern American history. Researchers examined the circumstances surrounding the attack. Experts analyzed the warning signs. Communities across the country reviewed their own safety procedures. Schools reconsidered emergency plans. Families discussed difficult questions about protecting children. But even after years of discussion, one question remained at the center of everything. How can a society prevent something like this from happening again? There is no simple answer. Sandy Hook revealed how complicated these tragedies can be. It was not caused by one single factor. It was not the result of one isolated moment. It involved a combination of circumstances that developed over time. A young man becoming increasingly isolated. A fascination with previous acts of violence. Access to weapons. A failure to recognize how these factors could come together. Understanding those elements became part of the larger conversation about prevention. But for many people, especially the families of victims, prevention was never only a political discussion. It was personal. Every debate represented a child who was gone. Every conversation represented a family that had been changed forever. The families who lost loved ones carried their grief into public spaces, because they believed remembering their children could help protect others. They spoke about their sons and daughters. They described their personalities. They shared photographs. They told stories that showed the world who these children truly were. Because they did not want their children's final moments to become the only thing people remembered. They wanted people to know about the lives before the tragedy. They wanted people to know about the laughter, the curiosity, the kindness, the dreams. A child should never be remembered only by the circumstances of their death. A child should be remembered by the life they lived. This became one of the most important parts of Sandy Hook's legacy. The victims were transformed from names in a news report into real people, whose stories continued to inspire others. The memory of Victoria Soto became connected with courage and sacrifice. The memory of Dawn Hochsprung became connected with leadership. The memory of the children became connected with innocence and the importance of protecting future generations. But the years after Sandy Hook also revealed another painful reality. Even tragedies of enormous scale can become surrounded by misinformation. The false claims and conspiracy theories that targeted Sandy Hook families created a secondary wound. For families who had already experienced the deepest possible loss, being forced to defend the reality of their grief became another burden. They had to relive painful memories. They had to answer cruel accusations. They had to explain again and again that their children were real. Their children existed. Their children were loved. This part of the Sandy Hook story became a reminder that tragedy does not always end when the immediate danger disappears. Sometimes the pain continues through the actions of others. The families who endured this treatment showed extraordinary determination. They continued telling their stories. They continued honoring their children. They continued standing for truth. Their strength became another part of the legacy. Sandy Hook also changed the way many Americans viewed school safety. Across the country, schools reviewed emergency procedures. Some increased security measures. Some changed how they trained staff. Some focused more attention on mental health support. The discussions were often difficult because communities wanted to balance two important goals: keeping children safe while ensuring schools remained places of learning, creativity, and connection. A school is supposed to be a place where children discover the world. A place where they build friendships. A place where they imagine their future. The tragedy at Sandy Hook challenged society to protect that environment without allowing fear to define childhood. For the educators who survived and the families of victims, healing became a lifelong process. Grief does not follow a schedule. There is no moment when someone simply stops missing a loved one. There are birthdays that arrive. Holidays that return. School years that pass. Milestones that should have been celebrated. Every reminder carries both love and pain. But many families also found ways to transform their loss into purpose. They created memorials. They supported communities. They helped others who experienced tragedy. They turned memories into action. Not because they wanted their children's names associated with sadness, but because they wanted their children's lives to continue making a difference. The story of Sandy Hook is often described as one of the darkest moments in America. And it was. But darkness was not the only thing that emerged from that day. There was also compassion. There was generosity. There was courage. There were countless examples of people reaching toward each other during a moment of unimaginable suffering. Strangers sent messages of support. Communities gathered together. People around the world remembered children they had never met. The tragedy showed the worst of what one person could do. But it also showed the best of what people could become when faced with pain. Today, Sandy Hook remains a reminder of both loss and responsibility. It reminds society that children are not statistics. They are individuals with stories waiting to be written. They are people with families who love them. They are lives filled with possibilities. The victims of Sandy Hook never had the chance to grow older. They never had the chance to discover who they would become. But the people who loved them continue carrying their memories forward. Their names continue being spoken. Their stories continue being told. Their lives continue having meaning. Because memory is a powerful form of resistance against being forgotten. And perhaps that is the most important lesson from Sandy Hook. Behind every tragedy are human beings. Behind every number is a name. Behind every name is a story. Charlotte Bacon was a daughter. Daniel Bardun was a son. Olivia Engel was a child with dreams. Josephine Gay was loved. Dylan Hockley brought happiness to his family. Madeline HSU had a future waiting for her. Catherine Hubbard, Chase Kowalski, Jesse Lewis, James Mottioli, Grace McDonnell, Emily Parker, Jack Pinto, Noah Posner, Caroline Providi, Jessica Ricos, Aviel Richman, Benjamin Wheeler, Alison Wyatt, and Anna Marquez Green were not just victims. They were children. They were loved. And they mattered. The 6 educators who died that day were not just names in a report. They were people who chose a profession built around helping others. They entered a school because they believed children deserved care, guidance, and protection. Their final actions reflected the purpose of their lives: to teach, to support, to protect. The story of Sandy Hook will always carry sadness. It should. The loss was too great to ignore. But remembering Sandy Hook is not only about remembering how lives ended. It is about remembering how those lives began. The laughter, the kindness, the dreams, the love. Because in the end, the most powerful way to honor those lost is not to focus only on the darkness that took them. It is to keep shining a light on who they were. And that light continues. Long after the sirens faded. Long after the headlines disappeared. Long after the world moved on. The memory of Sandy Hook remains. Not only as a tragedy, but as a reminder of the preciousness of every life, the responsibility to protect the innocent, and the importance of never forgetting the people behind the names.